All right. So, PJ, Christina, and Peter, thank you for being here. Take your time out of your busy schedules. We do appreciate it. So can we just have you guys just introduce yourselves? I'm sure everyone's a little familiar with you guys, but just who you are and your interest in orthopedics and just some general advice to get through M3.
I can start. So I'm Christina. I'm from New Jersey, as probably most of us. But I did my undergrad at Hopkins, then did a master's in nutrition at Columbia. And right now I'm doing my sub-Is. I went to NYU, at Columbia now, and then I'm going to Hopkins next. And then for M3, just like getting through your clerkships, I think staying organized is the best thing. There's a lot of deadlines, and especially if you're interested in orthopedics and trying to stay on top of research and being involved in clubs, just keeping your deadlines organized, whether it be Google Calendar, iCal, or notes tabs and things like that, that like kept me sailing because the time really flies by.
I think Peter's still, yeah, Peter's got her. Cool. All right. My name is PJ. I'm one of the M4s currently. I grew up in Belleville in New Jersey, and I went to school at Stevens in Hoboken for undergrad. And now I'm here at Rutgers. Currently at Jersey City for my sub-I. Next, I'm heading to NYU, Sinai, and then Lenox Hill. And for M3, the biggest thing for me was learning how I studied for the shelves. I think was the biggest thing, because after a while you get pretty good at like presentation skills and the clinical stuff. But what really makes it difficult to get honors, I think, are like the shelf grades. Because if you don't get the 3 or like 2.8 points, it's tough to get those 14. So the biggest thing for me was learning how to study for shells and doing that the same way every time. And that was basically like UWorld, and I had like an Anki deck that I used.
All right, can you guys hear me real quick? All right, cool. Sorry for coming on late, guys. I'm just coming home from call. But if you don't know me, my name's Peter. I'm one of the M4s also. I grew up in Staten Island. I've been in Jersey for the past 4 years, but I've been at Rutgers for starting my 10th year now. I was at the pharmacy school before, graduated, and I've been at Robert Wood since. No, I didn't take any gap years or do any masters or anything like that. So in terms of where I'm at, so last month I was at Sinai for my sub-I. This month I'm at Lenox Hill, and then I'll be going to Jefferson at the end of August into September, and then my last one is at Montefiore. So staying busy, but in terms of, just to echo what Christina and PJ have mentioned, I think part of M3, I personally enjoyed M3 a lot more than M2, M1. It was definitely probably the best year of med school, in my opinion. You don't, you're not in the books all day and all that. You're out there seeing patients, you're involved, and it finally feels like, you're doing what you sought out to do when you applied to medical school. With that being said, I think being organized, like Christina said, is very important. Like you're going to have your responsibilities in terms of your rotations. Then you're going to come home and, there's going to be no deadline for you to, study or submit an assignment or all that. It's just a lot of it self-paced, and you have to gauge what study materials you like. And I found what worked for me really well was to have a set schedule of how I approached every single rotation. And I kind of use that same schedule regardless of the rotation. Obviously, some lighter rotations in terms of hours, you might have more leeway to take a night off here and there or to change your study strategies. But I would say it's important to just kind of get into a rhythm early on. And that's kind of how I approached M1 and M2 as well, is find a system that works for you, use that system and adapt if necessary. And then with everything else, it's important to just stay connected, stay involved as much as you can. I would say early on in third years, like when you really want to get any research projects that you're working on, start finishing things up, it's important to stay involved. But towards the second half of third year is when you want to have like a good solid foundation of what your application is going to look like. So obviously there's going to be a lot more time for you to fill in things here and there, but one thing that I found helpful when it came to applying to aways and all that stuff is update your CV as you go throughout first year, second year, third year, every little thing that happens, update your CV, even if it's like once a month or something like that. Have that ready, and it'll make your life so much smoother when it comes to like the application cycle and even aways and all of that.
Awesome, thank you. So one of the few recurring questions that we got from our forms that we sent out was, how did you guys prepare for step 2, and any tips that you had for studying and then doing this before the sub-Is that come later on?
I think what's difficult about step 2 is that it's not like just a mega shelf exam. So you kind of have to study for it as you did step 1, in that like doing tricks like Anki and UWorld are going to be your most helpful. But like for me personally, I had medicine towards the end of my clerkship, so it was easier because step 2 is very medicine heavy. But I think the best thing I did was just to keep doing UWorld. That's the format of, I don't know how far, like how many shelf exams, I think you guys have taken 1 so far, right? And if you notice, like the NBMEs and UWorld are totally different question formats. And it was frustrating to me, but step 2 is more like UWorld. So just do as much UWorld as you can, and then staying on top of stuff as you get further away from clerkships is really important as well.
Yeah, I think I took a similar approach. I found that doing Anki, I used M1 too, and M2, so like that just worked for me. So Anki's great for spaced repetition. The other thing is like UWorld, you read the explanations because you'll see a lot of things come up over and over again. And then I took a pretty traditional approach to step 2. So like I did all of you, and opposite to Christina, I actually had medicine first, which kind of hurt me because I had to go back and like relearn that. So I did a more traditional approach, and I did all of UWorld once while I was in clerkships, and then I did it again during dedicated. So I took like a 4-week or like 4.5-week dedicated, just because it's the only step grade we have, and I didn't want to take a chance on it. So it ended up working out fine, but it depends on your schedule too. So if you have medicine last, you might be able to take a shorter dedicated.
Yeah, I think I'm more along the lines of what PJ had said, just because of, again, the way the schedule kind of worked out. I finished with kind of my elective block. So my last couple things are like OB and peds, and I was a little bit further removed from medicine and surgery. So I knew I definitely had things to brush up on. Throughout third year, I kind of did the same thing, UWorld, Anki, but I didn't like, I know some people do the cards and they kind of keep it running all year. For me, I've always found it more beneficial and helpful for me to focus on one rotation at a time, and that's what I did, and it worked out well for shelves, and it worked out. I think obviously you're gonna forget some stuff, but for me it's better to like be all in and focused on the rotation at hand and make sure I excel at that. And then I found when I went back to the material, it wasn't like so far removed that I had to like relearn it all over. It was just more so remembering the nuances. So I think the biggest thing you could do for step 3, or sorry, step 2, is being really thorough in your studying throughout M2 or throughout M3. Oh my God. Sorry, it's been a long day if you couldn't tell. These days take a toll on you. But yeah, I feel like my studying throughout M3 really helped bring me along to when dedicated came around. I took the same approach as PJ. Was I had done a pass because I had all my clerkships done throughout the year, and by the time I got to dedicated, I did all of the questions again, and that was my main study style. By the time I was in dedicated, I wasn't doing so much cards. It was more so like I reset everything, all of Anki, and if I got a question wrong and I knew it wasn't, more so, for example, like something with OB, if you know like a certain screen exam has to be done at like 32 weeks or something like that, and I had forgotten that number, I'd get a card just for that specific detail rather than have hundreds and hundreds of cards that like were backing up. I narrowed it down so that it would be very focused based off my incorrects, or even a question that I got right that I had forgotten a detail. And I found that it worked out really well. And my priority throughout dedicated was to really finish all the questions again. And I think that worked out well. From what the advice that I had gotten was that the biggest correlation with scores is the number of questions that you do. So whether you're AMBOSS, UWorld, whatever it is, whatever works for you is just questions. The more you see, the more you're going to be able to, retain, and it'll translate to exam day, in my opinion.
Yeah, and just to emphasize before we get off this topic, step 2 is not a route memorization exam. It's a critical thinking exam. So, the more questions you do, when you then you'll find the vignettes are extremely long. So you need to pick out the important things in these questions. Just answer the question. Don't overthink it. It's not a memorization exam.
Thanks, guys. So moving onwards, how'd you guys time applying for sub-Is, and how'd you pick which ones you wanted to go to, and what were the reasons that determined where you chose to apply and eventually go?
I could start us off. So I think there's a couple different ways to approach it, and I just want to preface this by saying the answer for me might not be the answer for PJ, might not be the answer for Christina, and it might not be the same for you. You just kind of, I think what would help for you guys is start thinking about, what's important for you. And as you progress through third year and you're starting to get some of your grades, also start getting feedback about where you stand as an applicant. And that might not come for, it's hard to gauge for any of us, to gauge where we stand individually, but talk to mentors, talk to people who have applied recently, get feedback from them. And something that I was kind of told by one of the faculty is that, we obviously the biggest scare is that we take step 2 so late now, and it's kind of like this number that everyone thinks, oh, you're either going to make it through or you're going to be strong enough to apply or not. But I think, your rotation grades should give you a strong indication of where you're going to go. You're not going to go from scoring a 10th percentile on all your shelves to automatically getting a 90th percentile, and vice versa. You're not going to, if you've been in the honor range for your shelves throughout the entire year, you're not going to suddenly drop to a 10th percentile on step 2. So you should have a sort of idea of where you're going to end up. It might not correlate exactly, and it probably won't, but for me, kind of everything was along the same line. So I kind of had an idea, but I never trusted myself. I went to mentors, asked for their advice, and then from there on, having an idea of where your application might stand compared to other people, but also, being judicious in that everyone nowadays has strong applications and all of that. So you just kind of need to be wary of that. Ask mentors for where they think what tier of programs might be a better fit for you based on your application. And then after that, it just becomes a preference thing. Are you more considered, considering location versus culture versus operative experience versus you just want to match wherever they'll take you across the country? You know what I mean? It's kind of what's important to you. And for all of us, that answer is different. So you have to think about what you value, what things you're looking for in a program, and start thinking about that. Look into programs. For me, some of the things that were important were location, the culture at programs, and I found that out by talking to residents there. I didn't apply to a single program where for a ways where I didn't talk to a resident there beforehand to a sense of what that program is like. And then I also kind of, it's always good and to know where our students have matched. It's a program will have a better sense of our students if they've matched our students in the past and they've made good residents. So I think that was something that I also considered.
I think one thing I really appreciated that our class did was we shared where we were intending on applying to sub-Is, and not that anyone said, oh, you can't apply here, I'm going here. I think what ended up happening is we ended up self-selecting. We only have one place that has a lot of overlap, but then other than that, I think there's only two, maybe max 3 students going to the same place, because in reality, most programs, the logistics of matching 2 of us from Robert Wood in a program that has 5 or even 4 residents is just so low. So you're going to have to assume that most everyone geographically wants to be Northeast. But then, choosing locations amongst certain cities is really helpful. Like I'm going down to Baltimore to Hopkins, but other people are going to Maryland and Union Memorial, and just distributing amongst that. And I think it worked out as well as it could. And just now being on sub-Is with other people and people saying, I wish I would have done that with their classmates, because you don't want to be competing with each other. And you really want to, it helps everyone then match if we're not all at the same place and trying to, show up one another, because we're all really strong applicants, I think. So that's one thing I would recommend. And again, like, don't get upset if someone's applying to the same place as you. That shouldn't deter you. It just helps guide. Like I knew I wasn't going to, both these guys are going to Sinai and Lenox Hill. So when I was looking at city locations, I was like, okay, a lot of people have interest there, and I don't feel really strongly about either of those locations. So I chose, to focus elsewhere. And then I did the same thing Peter did. I spoke to current residents at each location, or students who had done sub-Is there to get their experience. Geography was really important for me, but ultimately being at a place where there's strong mentorship was very important to me. So that's how I chose my locations, based on academic mentors and resident mentors. And then have your application ready early. It's going to feel like, I don't know, January comes around, you're like, oh my God, I need to start thinking about sub-Is. And then you're waiting. But the minute that application opens, you want to send in your application, because at the end of the day, there's only a few programs really filter out applications. The most programs just take based on availability. And so if your application is not ready, and I can't emphasize this enough, you may have everything ready and the admissions office just takes time to process things. So getting applications in as early as you can is so important. So as Peter was saying, update your CV frequently so that that's ready to go. Sometimes you need like health clearance, so like making a doctor's appointment. There's a AMCAS, like standardized vaccine form that most programs take. So I know like that wasn't one thing that was holding me back, but I had a doctor's appointment early on, and so I did that. And then just looking at the requirements before the applications open, because there's like HIPAA certifications, N95, like things that you don't realize you'll have to submit, and you don't want that to be the reason you don't get a spot somewhere. So
yeah, those are all really important. It's like a lot of housekeeping stuff, and then I think like I have a unique aspect in the group. Like I'm couples matching with Kelsey, who's doing peds. She's also an M4, so that is like, for me, that was the anchoring point in my decision making. So first I got realistic feedback from my mentors, like where I should apply, to narrow it down, and then when it came time to decide where I was going, geography drove me like the most. So Kelsey and I are like focusing on the Northeast, obviously, and we kind of use like New York City as like a center, and we're like making a ring out from there. So as you probably tell, all of my sub-Is are within like a 50-mile or 20-mile radius of each other. Like it's very concentrated. So that is something that, if you do that, that can take away from you being able to go to other locations. But, realistically, am I going to signal a program in Florida? Probably not. And that's a whole new thing that's really come out this year, is signaling. I've heard a lot of programs and like directors, when I was like on these Zoom calls, they're not like even interviewing applicants that don't signal them. And that's like a real thing. So you get 30 signals, and the program directors are like, if you're not willing to signal my program, then I'm not even in your top 30. So why would we interview you? Like, why would you come here? So that's like a realistic thing. And I think that's actually benefiting everybody, because we're not wasting our time applying to programs we won't go to, and the programs aren't wasting their time interviewing people that aren't going to come. So I think it's a win-win everywhere. But those are what I kept in mind. So, I'm going to be concentrated here. I'm really hoping it works out, but that's what's important to me. And, when you couples match, there's another person now that's involved, and that's like a whole nother thing when you make like a rank list. So I could always help people with that if you're couples matching and the time comes, but just things to consider. And orthopedics is really competitive, as you all know. So it's tough to do it when you couples match.
Well, awesome. So can you guys just talk us through how you actually apply? Is there a site that you visit? Is there a common place that all the apps go to?
Yes and no. There is technically like VLSO, which is, and that will tell you what most of the requirements are. But for example, NYU and Hopkins both had outside apps. So it's all listed on their website, the stuff you would need, but you really need to do some digging. I like starred all these things and I'm still getting notifications to this day about applications opening up, but it's really not organized well. So you have to kind of signal out. Maybe I would go like start big. Like I think I was looking at like 15 places that and I started to reach out to people and was narrowing down the list and looking at where other people were trying to apply, and then kind of looked at those specifically. The other thing about Aways is that they all have different application dates. They all will tell you at different times when you're accepted for certain months. You're applying for multiple months. So what gets really stressful is that, say you apply to Harvard and Sinai and you're applying for July and August for both of them, but one gets back to you for August, and then you don't know if the other one's going to get back to you for August as well or July. So you don't want to apply to like 10 to 15 Aways. Like you want to apply to Aways and wait till you hear from them, which can be very stressful, because if you get 4 Aways and you only have room for 3 and you reject one away, that's kind of saying, okay, this place probably isn't going to interview me now. So you have to be really judicious with where you're applying and do it really thoughtfully, I know like there was a few of us where we were just like waiting to hear back from certain places and not knowing if we should apply elsewhere. But I chose to only apply to 3 and wait until I heard back from those before applying to others.
Yeah, I think Christina summed it up nicely. The one other thing I just want to emphasize is that Christina mentioned it earlier, it is first come, first serve for most, if not majority of all these like programs. So having everything ready to go would be really smart, in my opinion. And then also you have to understand that our school takes a little bit of time to process things compared to some of our friends at other schools. So, this is something that we kind of joked about, but maybe it's even worth looking into, is just if there's a program out there in the middle of the country that you have no interest in, and they open up early, it might be worthwhile to kind of apply into that for an away, just so that the school starts uploading your stuff onto the website, because all it takes is that first time for them to upload everything, and then the process becomes a lot smoother, knowing that even if you're not going to go there and you burn that bridge, it's kind of like you haven't lost anything, but you kind of got the school started on uploading your stuff. I'm not necessarily recommending that. I'm just saying it was something that came up as a joke between us. But I don't know. You just be cognizant of the fact that our school takes a little bit of time to upload things. Personally, at the end of the day, I don't think any of us got burned by that. But you might need to send a few emails here and there and remind and kind of be on top of it. If you applied for something that opened up like a Sunday night, have that email ready to go Monday morning, letting them know you applied and letting them know that, you would really like to get this submitted as soon as possible, because obviously make sure that you ask in a respectful way and you don't, you're not harassing or disrespecting anyone, and they'll work with you. But also keep in mind that orthopedics tends to be one of the away rotations, some of the away rotations that apply the earliest. So there won't be that much volume when the process gets started for us. So like Christina mentioned, just keep in mind of what programs you're looking into. Even if you still haven't made up your mind, just have an idea of all those dates and make a spreadsheet for yourself. That's what I did, of what programs I was looking at, when their applications opened, and what things they required, and when, like, if any of them had a decision date of when you would know by. I would also write that down. Not all of them do, but some of them do, and that kind of helps of having like a backup plan, because if this one, for example, a program is going to get back to you in the middle of March, and there's another program that you're really interested in, and that might not open till April, then you know, it kind of works out. Oh, I'll wait for this one. If I get it, then I'll take that second program off my list. Something like that. It doesn't always work out like that, but just, you won't know until you really start messing around with the website and looking at dates and looking at different programs.
I think also one thing to keep in mind, and something you may not have control over, but is the order. You're going to feel, I feel like I hit my stride. This is my second away now. So it's my third sub-I. And I feel really confident in the OR. I feel really confident helping out on consults and writing notes and things. But then I'm also starting to feel a bit of the burnout. So keep that in mind with the order in which you're doing things. You're going to hopefully do Robert Wood first. And it sets you up like so well. You do like the most at Robert Wood. We have a great sub-I. And then your second away, it's something like adjusting to a new place. It may be like I went to NYU because I had been there for a summer, so I was somewhat familiar with it and had a few people to kind of vouch for me and help me along. And like we have Brian there who's an intern, so he was like helping me with some inside stuff. But you know, there was, if I was at somewhere totally new, learning a new EMR, like luckily they have Epic, so that was helpful. And then now at Columbia, they have Epic, and I feel like set. But then, you know, if I had to pick up and move in between or something, so think about like just be strategic about it. And burnout is very real. So you know, maybe I'm doing only 3, but if you're doing 4, think about that 4th location. Like, is it somewhere that you feel that you could still do well after doing 4 months of orthopedics prior?
Do you guys talk through some of the resources you use to prepare for your sub-Is, and any suggestions that you have for making connections at those sub-Is for potential letter writers?
In terms of materials, I feel like I'm using the same things pretty much on every rotation. It's the same textbooks, you know. There's Hoppenfeld's, which is a great like surgical approach to prepare for your cases, because I found that in the OR, a lot of the times you're going to get asked on, you know, questions about anatomy, approach, things like that. So that book I personally use almost on a daily basis, especially whenever I have any OR cases. There's the Handbook of Fractures that I really enjoy. I feel like it provides good summaries. And then, you know, ortho bullets, and also just like it kind of depends on the service that you're on. There's like a website, for example, it's called the Hip and Knee Book, that if you're ever on joints, every resident across institutions recommends for like learning the basics, you know. And those things are, you know, you could always ask people that have rotated on a specific service or been there before you, or even any residents wherever you end up. They're always willing to help out, and they want to make you look good, especially in front of attendings. So don't be shy to ask for help, and ask for students that have been there before you to ask how to, you know, succeed. In terms of finding letter writers, I think there's 2 different approaches. I think, you know, at Robert Wood, if you've been working with certain attendings for a while, and you'll get assigned a mentor during your 3rd year at some point, trying to end up on that service with them will be really advantageous for you if you are able to do well, especially if they've known you for a couple years. Because if you think about it, if you're going to vouch for someone, which is what a letter of recommendation is, vouching for that person, if you've known them for, you know, a year, 2, or possibly more, and then seeing them on service is way more beneficial, and you know, way better than someone that you've just seen for 2 weeks or maybe 3 weeks on service, even though you might do just as well as someone else. But like having that back relationship will really help you excel when you're on away rotations. The best advice that I got was, and that's what I've kind of been employing, is that ask the residents and ask students that have been there before you of what services are best, and what letter writers are best in terms of approaching. For example, with Sinai, before I got there, there's one of our older students who's now a resident there. She's a 3. I called her beforehand because they asked us to preference, you know, different services. And I was like, oh, what are some of the best services to be on? Not in terms of, you know, like chill hours or anything like that. That's not what I was looking for. It was more so, where can I build connections? Where are attendings that have a say in the residency process, and the resident selection, and what attendings, while you're on, when you find out what services you're on, are known to be good letter writers. And then, asking for feedback as you go, and then having a candid conversation when you do ask for a letter on an away, is asking the person if they're able to write you a strong letter of recommendation. And if it's always better to ask and get the letter. And if you at any time feel weary about how that went or how that interaction went, then you could always just not use the letter. But you'll know when someone is able to vouch for you, and give you that strong feedback.
Yeah, for resources, Ortho Bullets is really good. Pocket Pimp is like a good high yield book to have. Netter's Concise Ortho Anatomy was very helpful. If you have time to read that before you start an ortho like rotation, I recommend it. Hoppenfeld is like the go-to for surgical exposures. And the Handbook of Fractures and Ortho Bullets, I would say, are like somewhat synonymous. Handbook of Fractures is a little more comprehensive. But I think the key is to stick to like 2 or 3 top like resources and just keep using those over and over, because you'll hammer in the information. And as a med student, anatomy is highest yield. And then as you get more advanced and you see more cases, you can start to anticipate eventually you'll see so many total hips and so many total knees and so many posterior approaches. Like, you're going to know the steps of the procedure. You're going to know like what the tools are called, what the names are, like what the next step is. So once you get to that point, you start handing the residents an instrument. This is like institution dependent. Like some, scrub nurses won't let you do this, but if you get really close with the residents and the attendings, eventually like you're doing like the hip with the resident, and the attendings there just kind of watching. So these things develop as you get further and further in your training, which is like nice to see. But as a sub-I, you are expected to do a lot more, and that's again institution dependent. So just keep that in mind. The more that you can show that the more you'll get to do is also huge. As far as letter writers go, identifying them early. So I had like a little like note on my phone, and I had like a bunch of attendings names, and I kept a running list. And I did that, since M1, and then when I became an M3, like Peter said, I tried to target those attendings to work with, because you want to get clinical exposure with your letter writers. It's really important because they need to speak to all aspects of your education, not just like your intelligence. They need to see like how you physically perform, because again, this is a surgical specialty, so it helps to see that part of you. And I think, yeah, that's really it. The letter writers and the educational material. The letter writers, yeah, if they're like iffy when you ask them, then maybe that's not a strong letter. But you should get a feel before that.
Awesome, thank you. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna transition to our Q&A. So I'm gonna stop the recording, and if anyone has any questions that weren't answered in this little panel discussion that we had, feel free to ask.